guys, it's Bryant with Slam, and in this week's Slam Presents, we discover the professional path of photographer Trevor Nelson as we journey through his prints from the photo that changed his life to the work now hanging in the new Downtown Armory Hotel. Along the way, we discuss his passion for architecture, including structures that were crucial to Montana's history and his own as a photographer. We discuss digital versus film, and we even learn how much information you can glean from the single surface of an old object. This episode was brought to you by our good friends over at the Emerson, which is the Center for Arts and Culture here in Bozeman. Enjoy, and if you do, please like, subscribe, and share.
This guy was sort of my accidental foray into art photography. I had a class in architecture school that we were supposed to document historical and sort of the essence of the place. And this is shot on slide, and this is how it was shot. It was a puddle. I took the reflection of the elevator in the puddle because, in essence, this is there's always puddles around grain elevators, always.
So this was an assignment. You went out looking for a shot?
Yeah, I went out looking for a grain elevator photo that, I didn't really think I got it. I didn't really think I nailed it, but so the slide got put in upside down. That's the secret, and everybody was like, "Oh wow, that's really cool." You know, they looked at it and thought, "Oh, this sky and the elevator, and wait, what's going on here? And what are these?"
How surreal it actually
Yeah,
was.
it was a very surreal, and they were like, "Is that double exposure?" I'm like, I don't even know how to do a double exposure at this point. So yeah, that was sort of like, yeah, well, maybe I've got something here. Even though it was an accident, but it just sparked that, like, oh, I can do this and have there's different ways to look at things. Look at it upside down, look at it sideways, look at it, how does it work? That'll feed into like a lot of the later stuff when I started doing more abstract stuff.
So you went out looking for a grain elevator, and you had that grain elevator in mind?
No. I was, I think this goes for a lot of photographers. They're not looking for, they're very rarely pre-visualizing their photos. In the studio, that's easy. You can also, if you go and you've seen a great sunset from this hike on this mountaintop, you go set up and wait for that sunset, and maybe even a couple of times. If you walk by a house and you're like, oh, I really like that house, that detail is really cool. I'll wait for that weather pattern or those clouds or whatever to come back and hit that perfectly. So there is some premeditation that way, but most of the time I'm just out wandering. I'll go to a place, sort of tourist photography, really, see what comes.
Well, I wasn't saying that you had the whole shot visualized, and obviously as you saw the puddle you had a different inspiration, but you went out to take a picture of that grain silo? Or
Yes. I went to this town because there was a grain silo.
And then from there, how did you understand that taking it off the puddle would be the right photo? It was just an inspiration struck in that moment?
It was an inspiration struck in the moment, and like I said, I just shot it. Sometimes when you're out, you sneeze off a roll and you don't even realize you're out. You got to feed another one in. And I think that when you can drop into that sort of unconscious eye where you're seeing things and not necessarily thinking about it, it's really freeing. You don't overthink it.
And this was very early on in your photography journey.
Yeah, I was 22 years old, and I'm not sure if this is before or after I went to Europe. This is before I went to Europe without, this is the first time I'd ever shot a roll with a purpose instead of just snapshots and whatnot.
Do you think this photo changed your life?
I would say, yeah, absolutely. And I'd say actually the person that helped me see it, accidentally or not, in many ways changed my life. She was my first architecture professor, and later it was my thesis professor, and I took one class from her in the middle, and it was it was a sort of a seminar class of trying to find place with the camera. So.
And so this was film, right?
Yeah, this was
so you
slide
don't
film.
actually know what you fully capture until you're developing the photos.
Absolutely.
Do you think that digital photos ruin that? There's certain magic that doesn't come from development, or certain effects that happen in the development process?
Yeah, you're tapping into an argument like snowboarding versus skiing. I mean, it's there's a purity of happenstance and serendipity in film that you don't often get with digital. You also get a misfeed and you've got nothing from an entire shoot, or you have a setting wrong. You're shooting 100 speed and you've accidentally set it to 400 speed. There's lots of opportunity for screwing something up without realizing it.
Well, is there a certain magic in just taking the photos and not fully knowing what you captured?
It's like Christmas.
Like over-analyzing
every time you get your slides back, every time you get that package of photographs. I don't know if you're old enough to remember that. You go to the drugstore, you go to the photo store, you pick up your package, and you're like flipping through them as fast as you can because you want to see how great they are, or hopefully they're that one shot that you're really counting on working does.
Yeah.
And it's like Christmas or birthday. You're like, woohoo, yeah, I got it.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about over-analyzing in the moment.
A little bit of a relief and at the same time you feel like accomplished, and also it's that happy surprise. I mean, for amateurs especially, if you're a pro and you're dialed in. I mean, there's a lot of people that shoot now on film that are just so dialed in. And I think part of that is digital because, you can see right away that your settings are correct, but you still have to set the settings correct. But you get that feedback right away. So you have a lot less opportunity to screw up an entire shoot, but at the same time, you miss out on a lot of the accidental opportunities. You learn the feedback quickly. It's like instant lesson. Oh, dang, that's really dark. Okay, I gotta lighten this up. Do I want to lighten it up this way, this way, this way, this way? So you have the control is right at your fingertips, and you also know the result of that initial shot. That test shot. You're like, oh, okay, I got to go darker. Oh, I got to go lighter. Or the color saturation's way off, or the lights. I'm shooting on. They used to have a different type of film for flash photography because it was a tungsten-based light, so everything could turn out blue if you're shooting regular film. And you're like, if you don't know that the first time you shoot, it turns out really bad. Turns out really badly. So, yeah, there's just a lot of and slide film is one of those. Even when you get it back, you can't really see it until you've got it up on the screen.
Gotcha.
I mean, you can look at it through a loop on the light table and see, but it's still not the same as seeing it wall size. And that's one of the reasons. That's kind of one of the reasons that I've always wanted to go big with my photos, because that's how you see it. You walk up to a grain elevator and it's huge, right? You don't, or you see it on the distance, but you also get the whole horizon. Some of these cars that I shoot, you see it, but you don't see the detail till you get right up to it. So it's not really as big, but if you build it, like a lot of my current work, you build that landscape, and you make it bigger, even though it's very small.
You capture its grandeur.
You create the grandeur. Really, that's where the art comes in, is seeing it and being able to decide how you're going to present it. I mean, I could present them, life size and have postage stamp art, which it's a thing, but maybe that's something I do later. But
yeah,
for right now, I like to see it big. Maybe that's an immature photographer type of thing, but I don't know.
Let's go and loop back to this. So after you took that picture and you captured the perfect puddle reflection, did that inspire you to try and find more reflections?
Yeah and no. I think I started looking at things differently. I'd take pictures in windows where you'd see through, and you'd see what's behind, like what's reflectively behind. I'd take pictures of light reflecting off of something onto something else. Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of reflection stuff, and of course there was lots of puddle photos, but none of them really, it's like that, there's no feeling like that first time when you really nail it, even though you didn't mean to.
Yeah.
The more you overthink it,
it loses some of its magic.
It loses the magic, but you're so expectant that it'll be another masterpiece, and then and then it's just sort of more of what you did already. So let's go to what's next.
So from this, though, you spent some time taking photos of grain elevators, correct?
Yeah, I went into, well, after college, I did mostly architectural photography just because that was what I was really into. I did landscapes because, I mean, being from Montana, you can't help but, appreciate landscapes. I moved to a different part of the country, out in Oregon, where, it's that wonderful, it's kind of a sweet spot. You're about 2 hours from desert, sea, forest. You can see some of the most amazing old cedar trees and some of these gorges and waterfalls, and yet you go out to the coast and it's this rugged coastline. You've got Mount Hood and Mount Rainier nearby. I mean, it's not like you don't see them every morning. It's like it's a good day when you can see Mount Rainier. It's a cool thing when you get that sunrise and Mount Hood's like that perfect pointy little like indication of, yep, it's a good day. So, you get used to those kind of things. And then the architecture in Portland was really great. So, of course, even juxtaposing those and the rose garden and the arboretum and all the foliage just blew me away. Having it green almost all year was, different flowers blooming at different times, and within the architecture, and everything was really well designed as far as urban design, and you get these picturesque sort of city views and cityscapes, and not such a diverse culture, but culture. I mean, more than Montana for sure. Yeah, so architecture became my focus. And then after a while I got to miss Montana. And I thought about, Montana skyscrapers, which are grain elevators. So, and then I started really sort of getting back to, and this is again where that professor kind of put it in my head that, the connection, they're like the only thing that really connects the sky to the ground, and having such an impact in the community. I mean, a lot of times the grain elevator operators were the justice of the peace. They were the bartering, the lender. Farmers would come in, and the grain was the collateral. So, mayors, they were a really important part of the community. So they were literally the connection in the community to the earth for the farmers and to their well-being. So it just seemed like there was a lot to it, and the railroads were part of it too. And so I ended up taking a lot of photos like this, again on film, where it's like, you've literally got a pair of elevators. I think this is Box Elder, Montana, or somewhere right around there. But the light was dull, coming in low. But it worked out. I thought it was a nice image. It really kind of states what you're looking at in eastern Montana as you're driving between here and there, and they're spaced intentionally spaced by the railroad initially about 25 miles apart, because most of the time the furthest a wagon could get in a day and return was 12 miles. Wow. 12 to 13 miles, 12 to 15 miles. So you see, every 50 miles roughly, there's a bigger town, and then there's a smaller town in between that sort of represents the waypoint. And then if there's they sometimes the towns came before the railroads, but not often out here. A lot of times the town was there because the railroad decided to stop there. Yeah. So, you see those elevators out in the middle of nowhere with nothing really around them, like this. It's just because that was the distance the railroad deemed appropriate for an elevator to be.
That's really cool, and it's cool how your photography really captures a time period of Montana's history.
Yeah, and they're all going away. I mean, honestly, so many of them are. I mean, they're useful to a point, but so many of them are abandoned. People are tearing them down. I mean, it used to be that you'd see one burning for like a week, and the smoke was thick, and but it was because they were a liability. Insurance literally was the reason a lot of them went away, because they cost a lot more to insure than they'd ever be worth, and they're never going to get used again. So some of them, like there's one over in Ankeny here between Bozeman and Norris, that people have turned into a really beautiful house. Others have been turned into art studios. The Misco Mill down here is an art collective. I mean, there's a lot of people that are trying to save them as something.
It's a relic. It's a history of Montana.
It's a relic in a sense, in the greatest sense of the word, because it's never going to be, well, depending on what apocalyptic things happen in the next few years,
full circle back to grain silos.
Yeah, we could go back to the wooden old country grain elevators. There was actually a country grain elevator society that I was part of. A photographer here in Bozeman, Bruce Selliam, started it. He and his wife, and he went all over the country taking photos of grain elevators, and that was really inspiring. I've got a couple of his books, and he'd go up to Calgary, over to Tennessee, all the way, down into California. I mean, he crisscrossed Canada and the northern U.S. and took some of the most amazing photographs of, you're just like, how did he get that light to just show up that day?
Do you feel any pressure in taking a picture of this like timeless artifact, and that you're capturing its story correctly?
I'm just happy to capture it, honestly. I mean, I could, it's always one of those things. If you're trying to be documentarian, that's one thing. You got to talk to the people and find out who owned it, and get the dates and the details and the ownership and the lineage of the people around it, and find maybe that was like that one farmer that eventually took over the whole area, or maybe it was purchased by Cargill or purchased by one of the other companies that it's no longer family owned. There's a story to every one of them, and if you'd have to dig quite a bit into some of them, because a lot of them are tiny little towns, and there really isn't a whole lot of there isn't a depository of history so much as the depository of history is the people that live around there. So it's like the elders and the tribes. The stories get passed down, but when the elevator ceases to exist, people start asking, what about that? So I felt like it was something that I wanted to get documented in an architectural, in a graphic, photogenic sense. Not so much to find the histories of it, but just so people remember it was there.
So how long were grain elevators your focus?
Mm-hmm. Well, I did a photo tour. It was like I had too much time at my job without taking a vacation, so I took this trip out here in '97. I think this was '97, yeah, that I took this, and me and my black and white camera, and I had a black and white camera that was all manual, and then I had a color camera that was taking slides, and I had a medium format camera that was taking, like, if I found a really good one, that was the one I was going to take with the medium format. But I had the other cameras to help me set up the images, because there was this great little thing called light meter built into some of these, or autofocus or auto, whatever. And that was sort of like that first part of what became digital, is, it would automatically tell you, okay, you need either this or this, depending on what you're really focused, what you're really aiming for. And it'd be great, because I could just use that information, and I could set the old, camera from the teens and set that and make the image for me. So this was a 35 millimeter, and I got had a little fun and put it in a full frame carrier in the dark room, and that was all the rage, showing the edge of the frame. I shoot a lot of full frame. That's just how I see it. Maybe I'm not saying that shooting to crop is lazy, but when I see something, I want to lay it out just right.
So you want to make sure, like, your photo is, like, what you take is the whole photo that you present.
Yeah.
As compared to crop, it's like you just take the whole thing, but it's only going to be a small section, so later you'll edit it down.
Right.
But your photo.
Right. A lot of people do that just because you never know what's going to be there, and if you want to shoot it, the one format, whether it's square or vertical versus landscape, is most pleasing. It gives you the flexibility. But I'd usually 2, 3, 6, 12 photos of the same thing with the different angles, but I'd have them all composed exactly the way I wanted them to. So anyway, that's that.
So that was around 97, and then after that, what was next on your
just
journey?
Architectural photography was one of those things that I just always did. So out in Astoria, Oregon, there's a lot of old Victorian houses, and that was one of them. This was believe it or not, the servants' staircase in one of these houses.
It does look steep.
Yeah, well, but it was really fun to see. Just, I don't know, the details, but to see them as graphic, to see them as I was always inspired by that image looking straight up the staircase in the Vatican. You've seen it a million times, or straight down, where it's just that ornate spiral going straight down, or if you're in the Guggenheim in New York, you get that consecutive, or that concentric circle effect. But this one is it was an odd shape, being the sort of the ovoid, or the stretched out circle, or whatever you want to call it.
Was this the case where you happened to have your camera with you, or you saw this and you knew you wanted to capture?
No, this is a tourist photo. This is, hey, this is cool. I was there because, it's Astoria. There's beautiful photographs everywhere. Whether you're photographing the river, or the ocean, or the mountains, or the houses, or the cool little main street. There's just so much history there. The old piers.
So do you have time that you set out, like an hour or 2 hours or a couple hours each week, or like once a day, that you're going to go out with a camera and just see what happens?
I wish I had that luxury. I probably could. I'm not terribly busy, right now. I'm trying to put a few things together, and I do a lot of side work I do some construction and
back then,
stuff.
so in Oregon.
In Oregon, weekend trips. We'd do, a little weekend trip here. We'd go see this little town. We'd go.
And you'd always have your camera with you?
Always have my camera with me. It's just sort of, I'm going to.
Part of the tool belt.
Go on. Yeah, absolutely. And even on the construction site, you always have a camera around. You never really know what's going to show up. Back in the day, we had to have a camera on the construction site so we could document our work progress. You'd go out to a job, and you'd be checking out the contractor's work, and you'd take the camera with you, and you'd bring the camera back, and then you'd go up and you'd have documentation of if the contractor was doing it correctly.
Were you ever surprised by some of the artistic stuff that you got from like a simple construction photo?
Oh, all the time. I mean, after my architecture career, I just kind of decided I wanted to go back to what I really started. I loved doing houses, and that was, after remodeling my own house and learning all of the stuff that I did as an architect, I started, working small jobs and flipping houses was ultimately what I did. But you get into some of these old houses and the intricacies of the way they built it, out of small timber sticks for the most part, 2x4s. It's fascinating. And sometimes even just when you're peeling up an old ugly floor and there's this crazy juxtaposition between this tile pattern or the CS the flooring that's down, and then the flooring that was there, and then the flooring that was there before that, or the wallpaper that's you're peeling off in layers and it's coming off, and you're looking at it going, wow, this thing was painted, wallpapered, painted, wallpapered, wallpapered, wallpapered.
Yeah, you have like a history. It's like a timeline
history, you're peeling
the wall.
Right,
That's
you're
cool.
peeling the history. And then like one time we even found a shoe. Apparently it used to be a thing to put a child's shoe in a house when you built it. Brought longevity, apparently. I don't know, but it was really creepy until we figured that out. There's this child's shoe in this house, and it was an old leather, like hand-sewn shoe from, the house was built in 1897 or 1898, and we found this shoe, and and it's in a first story, so it wasn't like something that fell off the edge in the attic and went down, because these houses were built balloon frame, so that you could drop something over into the wall and it would go all the way down into the
like a plank board.
Right. It was it's bouncing off the nails in the lath, but there was just so much weird stuff that happens. You find the guy that I worked with a lot out there, he was just as artistic. He's a sculptor, and he'd find weird little connections and weird little things. Like, okay, this piece right here, and you can't see it, but it's a shelf. It's the bottom shelf from a cabinet of a house that we tore the kitchen apart. The green paint has given way to what used to be yellow paint, has given way to what used to be probably primer, and then there's raw wood around the holes. It was the bottom shelf, so it drained, right? It was in the butler's kitchen. But I held it up and I was like, I really like this.
Do you think you appreciate this stuff different? You have this artist's eye, and maybe you're working with somebody who's just doing construction, and you're a little more into the things you discover.
He's a fabulous artist, and
so you both
we feed off each other. We totally feed off each other, and it was. He's still, and I'll find weird construction things or weird, metal things, and I'll be like, he's gonna like that.
So you take a picture and you send it and you share?
No, I grab it. We'll just, like an old faucet handle or an old spigot he's trying to build a chess set out of old, water.
Interesting. Different pipes.
Well,
fixtures.
Yeah, just different fixtures, like lawn hose things. Anyway. So, but that was one of those kind of crazy little things that came from, sort of after I started seeing all these cool little details. You start seeing this kind of stuff everywhere.
So you're paying more and more
attention to the weird little details. Not necessarily the architecture anymore. It's more like you start to see the graphic.
Well, you started scaling down. You started with these huge grain silos, and then you started focusing on.
I always photographed. I've got a lot of photographs of the cool little cribbing that you get on the edge of the grain elevators. It stacks end to end. You're stacking 2x6s or 2x8s on top of each other for 100 feet. 25 feet wide is one of the cribs. So you're doing 100 feet long, or 50, usually like 60 feet long, because there's a 10-foot section in the middle. So you've got a lot of wood right there, but when at the edges, it's always you know, you get end grain, end grain, end grain, end grain at the corners, and then the cribbing as it goes up, the lap is always about 4 feet apart. So you've got these lines that go straight up. That's in just the wood. You know, then there's the metal that used to clad them all. You know,
So
sometimes you get graphics in there. Sometimes you get partial graphics. Sometimes you get wires that hang down, or big augers that move the stuff around and, you know, over onto the tracks, and you get that line, and you get the auger, and you get the elevator, and you get that window, and you get the door, and the window up there, and you get a tree or some sort of a shed, and it all kind of composes. And when you get to the point where you're starting to see the composition everywhere, you see it wherever you are, whether you're looking at a job site, whether you're looking at a grain silo or grain elevator, whether you're looking at a funky museum in Denver, you know, where there's like all angles everywhere, and you know, you go to the library in Seattle where there's just it's like a complete overload of you know, angular, like I'm kind of feel like I'm defying gravity here. It's kind of cool. But you know, once you start seeing that, you start seeing it everywhere, and then if you start seeing it like,
So they started training your eye.
yeah, you know, you start seeing things like, this is an old series that I'm going to bring back. Very graphic, you know, compositions of, you know, is that supposed to go that way? Is it supposed to go that way? Is it supposed to go, you know, how does this actually work? You know, but overall the graphic is, you know, balanced, and it's got a color palette that does its thing. You know, I found myself taking a lot of these kind of photos. I didn't really know what to do with them.
It was just something you were drawn to.
Right. So after I was in Portland, I came back here, and I ended up deciding to I'm going to take, you know, there wasn't a whole lot of architecture or construction jobs, so I just decided to go back to school and do something artistic. I took a photography program here, and one of the things that I ended up, you know, being the color class, the first introductory color class. I took this final project, and I called it CMYK, and sometimes CMY, and sometimes K, and it was all about just finding all of the colors of the spectrum, and in vehicles, in, you know, whatever. And so I did try to do it with vehicles, and it's surprisingly easy to find, you know, all the colors of the spectrum in old vehicles. And so the graphics part, you know, this is one of the magenta, or maybe it was red.
So what vehicle is that?
I would have to look it up, honestly. I think it was some like a Bel Air, some sort of one of the first ones with sort of the hips, you know. There was a lot of them that I didn't think to take down the names of the car. I didn't think to take, you know, and a lot of them, there wasn't any, without looking it up online to find what it was I was looking at, there was no make.
So did your focus start to shift from building to vehicles?
I don't know necessarily why. I think it was just because that was the details. And honestly, you'd see these things sitting out in the middle of nowhere. And they were part of the landscape whether we liked it or not. And, you know, being from Montana, you're used to seeing detritus. And, you know, you get a lot of windshield time driving around, and you go by these eyesore places where there's just lines and lines of cars. Or there's a farmer that saved every car he's had in the last, you know, since his dad. And, you know, you get these really great old trucks. Sometimes there's even Model A's, Model T's. You know, I was at one farm where there was literally a little coach, you know, a horse-drawn coach and a buggy. So I mean, literally everything they drove from day one of, I don't know, of automated vehicles, and it wasn't even automated with the horses, but and the different layers of wear, how the weather has affected them, how the sun, the elements just have, I started thinking it's trying to take it all back, and I think that was maybe a continuation of the grain elevator starting to fail and fall down and whatnot, and that was kind of fascinating how gravity was working on these massive, super strong, for the time, buildings, and you get a sense of, that how many, I can't tell you how many, if you're walking out in the middle of eastern Montana, there's an old car just sitting there in the middle of nowhere. I mean, you get that here. There's an old car up at the top of what is it, Old World Gulch or something. There's an old car up there. How the heck did it get up there? You get, there's an old one laying on what we all used to call the Ghost Road, which is sort of the road from Kagi to Mount Ellis. There's an old one out there just laying there. There's one in the river down on the East Gallatin. So they're everywhere. And I started taking pictures of those. Sometimes I'd use those as props to balance an elevator photo. Sometimes then I'd start focusing on that, and I'd find these cool little, graphic things. And at some point, and I think it was, might have been this project that sort of instigated that, but there was an old dead car yard out where Gooch Hill meets 191, and I spent probably, I don't know, if you laid it all out, I'd probably spent a good week there every day, not consecutively, but I mean, I really found some super interesting images in there. They didn't really fit into any project except for this one.
It's just cool. I never thought about how much a small section of something could really reveal its whole timeline. That you see how much history and what's happening with the car.
Well, you can see
elements.
Yeah, you can see, like, this is, so when they were driving, this was the part that caught the wind, right? This was covered by chrome. This, I don't know what exactly happened there. I think maybe it could have been, I don't know, but so this is actually this way, of course. So you see there's the hole where the screw was in with the pin, and then there was a drip of rust. But you get these distinct lines of color, and there's I've got cars with bullet holes. I've got cars with just really rough shape where there's literally a rusted out section, and it provides this really cool like bottom edge. And that kind of led to, I started seeing that there were, it's almost like a horizon line, at the bottom of some of these cars with this rugged bottom rusted out edge. And I took a few pictures like that, and then I started thinking about how you can actually make kind of a simulated landscape out of some of these really weird little details. And that was sort of what brought me to the Salvage Landscape, which is, there's a lot of these that were shots that I'd taken before. I went back and looked at them and was like, oh yeah, I can make something out of that. So this is just the edge of a car door, but it could very well be a photo of that you take off of your Caribbean vacation of the ocean and the clouds at night or something.
Like a frozen lake.
Or a frozen lake. See, that's just it. Everybody has a different experience that they bring to it, and they feel like it could be something. And that was where I really loved it, is you get these you just get these images that you can look at, and they'll have their own little personality.
Yeah, and it's so ambiguous. It could be anything, and it's
Right.
what you create in your mind.
Right. Here's another one so what I did is eventually I started mounting them on panels because again, going big, right? This was one that I had taken years ago, and I was going through my catalog trying to find new things, just tossing some of the stuff that I'd taken, because there's a lot of stuff that's just I thought it was great when I first started shooting on it, and not so much. But this one was, it was a boat, I believe, out in the woods of all things. I think it was out.
Cars in the river, boats in the woods.
Right,
Yeah, in Montana.
Yeah. Well, there was one of my girlfriends a while ago. Her brother had a place that he had a bunch of stuff. He was a collector. He had really eclectic things: motorcycles, boats, motorhomes. But I just saw this cool line. I don't know why I thought it was a good idea to take a picture of it, but I thought the bright color, the bright red, was really interesting, because considering that everything else was, that beige color for the most part. You could see starting to see the fiberglass inside it.
What I think is so cool about that photo is it looks like a painting, but I guess it is because it's like the painting from the boat.
Well, art is art. No matter what medium you're making, the essence of fine art is you're scraping something off onto something else. Photography, I think, is one of the only ones that doesn't do that, but you're capturing it and chemically affecting, or photochemically affecting, what it is your subject is onto another thing. So the imposition in this case was film, but it was also digital. Now is you're still photochemically, or I don't know what even words to use. You're imposing that image onto a digital, a series of chips. Those pixels accept the light, and they break it into 3 parts, and they transfer it to a memory card.
You're still seeing something different because it's like there's still a filter when it gets captured digitally.
Right. That's why you get, digital cameras have come so far, as everybody remembers those first digital photos that they took, and they were kind of blurry, and the color was all weird, and if you made it too big, it was all like, you see all the pixels. Your first exposure to pixelization. But now it's gotten to the point where you can barely tell the difference in some cameras, whether it's film or digital.
Do you shoot more on digital these days, or more on film?
Almost exclusively digital now. It makes me sad. I'm moving back towards a film. I've got a lot of film cameras that I really kind of miss. I just bought a View camera, and I'm really looking forward to taking that out.
Do you think there will always be film cameras?
There better be. It's like oil painting. For a while everybody moved to acrylic because it was cheaper. It dried faster. You didn't have to be so patient with your medium.
I imagine the black rooms are the biggest obstacles to film, or the reason why film has become obsolete. It's not so much the technology, but the space and the stuff that needs to help develop it. Yeah. The space, the time it takes to develop it. You have to have a totally black room to unload some film, to load and unload some film. You have to have a dark room with a safe light that is very specialized. You have to have the chemicals and the trays and the basins and and then even now it gets even more complicated because of the chemicals. You're dealing with heavy metals. It's a silver. There's silver in the emulsion and in the developer, so you're pulling some of this silver nitrate off the film,
and then you're throwing it away, and then you're doing the same thing with the paper. So all of this it now has to be filtered, and all of these processes take equipment, and that costs money. Whereas digital, all I need is
you take a picture.
you can buy a $50 printer and get a decent color photo from a camera from your phone. I mean, you don't even have to have a camera anymore. It's so much easier to take photos now. It's not necessarily easier to be a photographer, but you're finding a lot of people that have a lot of talent that never would have done it. So it's hard to be a photographer right now. You have to find that niche that says, this is me, this is what I do. It's easy
because the barriers to entry are so low, but now anybody can jump into that pool.
Yeah.
So exactly. It's harder for you to stand out.
Yeah.
Before, you just had to put in the work, and that helped you because it was harder for people.
It was harder for people to do. I mean, back in the day with the the daguerreotypes and the tintypes, there was one guy that went around and did this in the towns, and he had his little thing, and he'd go do it. Or it was a big deal for like Ansel Adams to carry around. I mean, he carried around a pack with all of his equipment up into the Jackson too. These guys would carry these massive cameras up into some of the desolate places, the Tetons or in Yosemite. I mean, that that iconic picture of El Capitan is how high did he have to get to that point? I mean, now it's there's practically a paved trail up to that, but
and he's just a little camera.
But I mean, he was there, when very few other people had been there, right? Some like Jackson was running around taking photos of stuff that he was kind of loosely following the Lewis and Clark Trail, which is massive, and taking pictures. He went from he'd take some pictures of indigenous peoples to landscapes to and a lot of documentation. Just amazing things, and he would go to his little cart that he had all blacked out, and he'd do the development, or he'd make the tin plates and load them up into the carriers. And I mean, we're talking negatives or single prints. A lot of times there were single prints. It was a one-off. It was like a monoprint where you take the picture onto a tin type, and that was it. That was all you got. If you screwed it up, you screwed it up. You had to take it again. And you didn't know until you went and did the chemical process. So it took a lot of effort to get photography to where it started to where it is now. And now I can find an old car and think, oh yeah, that's cool. I'll take a picture of that. And then, you crop it to the way you want it. I mean, I didn't take this as this. This is a series of 5 different photos laid on top of each other.
Oh, wow.
Fused together. But
you're saying that's the whole side of the car.
This is the whole side of the car, right? So, I mean, first I was there, and then you always take overlap, so you get continuity. And but I mean, this is probably one of my best images to describe the Salvage Landscape line series. This is actually hanging in the Armory Hotel.
Oh, cool.
And the music hall. 8 feet long. So, I mean, imagine three times this roughly. It's taller.
And these photos had a few names, right?
Yeah, it started out as it was called a forest fire, and then I thought, no, that's a little dark. Then it became Foggy Morning Logging Road, which kind of stuck for a long time. And it got to the point where so many people saw different things in it that they didn't understand why I named it that. So when I had my last show at the Rapscallion, I just gave them all people names. And I didn't show this one there, so it doesn't have a people name. But like the one that I showed earlier, the red one, that's Diana. It never had any other name.
Do you go through the alphabet and each one it's like subsequent has the next letter, or you just kind of whatever name comes to
I
you?
look at it and like that one's Diana, and I don't know why. It just felt like Diana. It's not for the late princess. It's not
Or
for
Wonder Woman?
anybody I've known or Wonder Woman. No. When I first took it, I called it Rothko in red, just because Rothko is one of my favorite painters, and I tend to look at things a lot more in painterly. With that series, it was a lot more painterly. I'd look at Chatham, I'd look at Rothko, I'd look at some of the. I mean, even Rembrandt. The way, or Van Gogh, just having the crazy skies, the very formalized positioning in the image, or this, like with Chatham especially, just the sort of ethereal. You're looking through that atmospheric haze. It's sort of like when you sit back and you squint a little bit, you get a much different image than when you're just looking at it straight on. I've always kind of liked that, where you it's the Monet trick. He was practically blind. He saw everything like you're squinting at it, right? So that's why a lot of his stuff is really bright, really bold, and not so precise, because he couldn't really see it that way. So anyway.
So did you always know you wanted to be a photographer, or did that really change in your early 20s?
I have never really called myself a photographer. I do, but I think of it. I've always thought of it more of a hobby. I've made money at it. It's not my primary source of income, but I think that it's a major part of my life. It's my foremost creative outlet. I think everybody needs that creative outlet. Some people are amazing journalers. Some people are great writers. Some people are great painters, printmakers. Some people sew. Some people sing, write music. I mean, everybody's got their creative outlet. You make films, I mean, I imagine you're creative in a lot of other ways too, journalistic. I mean, there's creativity there. You got to find the angle. You got to come at it like, okay, how's this going to be interesting to most people?
Yeah, I write and I produce events, so even
Right.
event design.
Yeah,
there's a
event
lot of
design or
creativity.
set design. Gosh, that's a whole other ball of wax. Just architecture. I mean, there is, believe it or not, still creativity in architecture.
Yeah.
You're not just a mouse jockey, and
Not only in the design, but how you approach the production process. There's a lot of creativity.
Right, absolutely. I mean, we have new technology and new resources that we'd never had, like the SIPS panels that they're using across the on the new Native American Hall. Those were an idea, and we kind of created the same thing, but never had them mass produced and easily available, and certainly not as efficient as they are. So those kind of things. Yeah, creativity comes. Engineers are creative in a lot of ways. So this is my creative outlet. That's what it really comes down to. And my real job is I run the art and architecture department at the MSU bookstore. So the great thing about that is I've taken almost all those classes, and I still know a lot of the architecture professors. So it makes me kind of uniquely qualified to be able to, help people understand what they really need, instead of just going down the list and say, oh well, I need these paints and I need this brush, and I can, if they're like, well, why do I need this? I can actually explain to them why this brush is better than this brush. Don't buy the $1.20 brush. Buy the one that's $5, and I know it's more, but it's going to last you, and blah 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 blah. A lot of people come in and they want to know the difference between this paint and that paint. They want to know, they want to start something. I don't know. I want to start to oil paint, but I don't know what I need. Those are the kind of things that I really get a lot of satisfaction out of, because my parents were teachers. I always, joked around that I'd be a pretty good teacher, and I get to kind of teach a little bit, just because that's the role with the students. I end up in a lot of talking to them about they come in and they have a problem they've never really had to address. Like, how do I glue this piece of metal to this piece of cloth? Well, let's see. Problem solving. And that's really, a lot about art and life, really. Just, problem solve.
Very true. So photography's always been your creative outlet. Do you think it's evolved or changed, or the way you view photography or its place in your life has evolved or changed over the years?
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, in a lot of different ways. I mean, the availability of it has changed the way I look at it, and that, like we were talking earlier, the sheer effort it took to make a photo has changed completely. Now you get, we have selfies. I mean, that was never really, it was a thing, but it was always kind of it wasn't looked at as it wasn't as prevalent as it is now. I mean, self-portraits were a thing. I mean, Van Gogh and Vermeer, and even Leonardo, all the way back, all did some version of a self-portrait. But now, my 14-year-old niece, she's got an entire Instagram full of selfies. It's like, some of them are okay, but most of them are aimed at a completely different thing than artistic ideals. It's an expression of themselves, which I think it has to be. We'll look at it in history as some sort of. It'll find its place in the artistic history. Don't necessarily know what that means. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that we didn't expect to be a thing in artistic history. Some of the folk art. It was just some guy putting together something with what he had. It's a huge valuable part of the dolls that people would make. They'd play with a doll made of straw. It was an effigy of something, but it was a little person that their child could play with. That's a valuable part. It all has taken effort. Now we just go buy things. Now we just snap a shot because we can. I think before it took a lot of effort and a lot of seeing what you're taking, some pre-visualization, some reason to take it rather than just because I can. So photography's changed in its accessibility, but it's also changed in its deeper meanings.
What about its place in your life?
I would say it's a constant. It's never really driven my intentions or my goals. I mean, it's something that I'm always going to fix my website. I'm always going to clean up my hard drive. I'm also always going to get to that file of unprocessed photos. But do I? When I'm ready, or when I'm motivated, or I'm not so busy doing, maintenance on properties, or doing stuff for the store, or, working with, doing other things. I mean, I do a lot of other things. I've got a lot of tools that I like to use. So,
Cool. Two last questions.
Okay.
One, you talked about how accessible photography is now, but what is one good tip that you could give to anybody looking to try their hand at photography, or someone who's been doing it for a little while but wants to improve?
Well, given that now it's so cheap to take photos, I would say never just take one. I mean, most photographers are taught to bracket. So you take one that's lighter, one that's darker, one that's right in the middle. That way it's more likely you're going to get the right exposure. That's been from, that's back from black and white photography. That's from film photography, really. Now it's just hold the shutter button down and just so you're practically taking a film screen grab, right? So I mean, you can wait for that perfect moment, and if they blink, you've got one that's a split second before and after they blinked. You know, they still got the smile, but they blinked. I'm really good at getting blinks. Really, I've got a lot of really great pictures of people's eyelids.
I close my eyes all the time.
Yeah, it's like I can anticipate exactly when they're gonna blink. So you know, but that's one of the things is like you'll miss a lot of opportunities because you only take one photo.
It's a great piece of advice. And lastly, where can people find or purchase your work?
That's a tough one. I don't do the markets anymore. It just got to be too much with all of the stuff. I do slam when I can. I have had a couple of shows. Most recent was in Rapscallion. It was horrible. It was a group show. Kelly put together a really great show, and we got shut down like a week into it. So we had a great opening, and I sold quite a few pieces, but I sell more pieces just talking to people and comparing, and I do trades with other artists, and I think Kelly and I are talking maybe another show in some point in the future. I need a website finished again. I'm always going to finish my website, but I am closer to having it with e-commerce, and that'll be out soon.
Until then, Facebook?
Until then, you can get a hold of me on Facebook, Instagram. My handle on Instagram is 10photo, so 10 photo. If you're asking why 10, my initials are TEN. Not all that original, but
no, that's cool. It works.
You know,
if it works, use
and
it.
10 PHOTO was taken, so 10 photo.